Hello and thank you very much for watching this video. So this series of videos that I will be making starting from today will be about research, and I want to make these videos to be some sort of videos that helps us to make sense of research. So as a starting video, I would like to talk about what research is, research as a definition, and what is the purpose of research and the research process. So research as a word is sometimes used informally and formally. We use it sometimes in our conversations in a very informal way, such as when I say that I will be traveling, let's say next week to Barcelona, and then I'll use it in conversations like I would like to research on the different tourist spots in that country. So that's one informal way of using the word research. But how research is defined in the academic community or in the scientific community is that it is more of an inquiry or an investigation to answer a certain research question through a systematic process, which usually involves methodologies such as data collection, literature review, analyzing the data, and interpreting the data to come up with a certain recommendation and conclusion, which then leads to the dissemination of the findings, and as well as changing practice or making an impact, depends on the type of studies. Now that's my own definition of research in my own words, but these are usually based from different authors, because if you really look at the different definitions of research, the word research from different authors, most of them will sing in the same tune, and the most important thing to really consider and pick out into those definitions is that when we talk about research, it usually refers to a systematic approach, systematic inquiry, and this usually is done in order to answer a certain research question or research problem. Because in research, it usually starts with a research question. If you are a researcher, you want to conduct research because you have a burning curiosity in your head, or there's a research question in your mind that you would like to answer, and that usually proceeds with the next stage or next process involved in research. So it usually starts with a research question, which then guides as to how you move forward with your research if you are going to be conducting a study as a researcher. So research studies are done for a variety of purposes. We see research heavily conducted in the areas of healthcare, also in marketing. Sometimes in businesses, sometimes they conduct research in the form of marketing research in order to determine, like for example, which sells better, or how can they strategize themselves as a company in order to make more profit. So it can be done in a variety of ways as well. And the purpose of research also determines as to what type of or what kind of answers the researcher actually wants. And this also dictates what type of research is to be conducted, because the purposes of research can be in so many ways. Research studies may be conducted for the purposes of like maybe explaining something. It could also be conducted for the purposes of describing something. Maybe there is some phenomenon, or I don't know, maybe a behavioral pattern that hasn't been described yet, and a researcher wants to conduct a study in order to provide a good description of that particular behavioral pattern or phenomenon. Some research studies are conducted in order to predict things, and as well as to explain things and describe. And we could really name or list a long list of different purposes of research, because research in itself, of course, as much as I have already mentioned about the different purposes of research, it can also be having mixed purposes, and that really depends on the researcher and as to what they really want to study and answer in the first place. So since research in itself is a systematic process, so it comes with a step-by-step approach. And most of the time, of course, when you browse books about the research process, you could see maybe 7 steps, maybe 10 steps, but usually they're just the same. They may just be using different words. So for me to summarize the research process usually starts with a research question, which then leads to the review of the literature, or viewing different sources and different studies as to how the researcher can support the research question. And maybe there are other studies that have been conducted that has answered the same research question that you have formulated, or maybe there are similar studies. And it's just really good practice to explore a range of studies before really conducting or implementing the study or developing your methodology, because there could be a variety of studies available out there that have been conducted, which also gives some sort of answer to your research question. So again, the first step is usually formulating the research question. Next is the review of the literature or review of related literature, which then leads to the design of a certain methodology, and this then leads to the methods in the form of data collection. Data collection can be in many forms, such as conducting an interview, or through a questionnaire, or through observations, and as well as these data, whatever the information or the data that has been collected, will be interpreted. Sometimes this may need the help of other experts, like professionals in the fields of statistics, if it needs some statistical treatments and statistical analysis, because some researchers, of course, some researchers may be familiar with statistical methods and how to really treat them with the use of statistics, but there could be some researchers who may not be familiar with that as well. Like for me, I'm not really that well versed in the areas of statistics, and if I have a certain study which usually involves a lot of statistical treatments, and I might need an expert to help me with that. So after the data analysis, of course you have data interpretation or interpretation of data, which then leads to the coming up with a conclusion, and then after the conclusion would be the dissemination of my results, and as well as implementing that research study, depending on what type of research study it really is, because studies can be of different types. You have the observational type of research study, wherein one just observes and doesn't really interfere with the participants, and there's also that type of research study wherein the researcher tries to intervene. A very good example of that are interventional clinical trials, wherein, for example, if a drug is going to be developed, before a drug is going to be sold in the market and to be available in a certain country, they need to run through tests first. And this can be through clinical trials, wherein drugs or the specific drug will be tested on different people to see if it really works or not. And of course, there are different methodologies in how this is going to be conducted. So that's the research process as a whole. It usually starts with a research problem, which then leads to the review of related literature, just to check for previous studies, or if there are other studies out there that have or that can support the research question, as well as maybe there are other research studies that can give some sort of an answer already to the research question that you have formulated. After the review of the related literature is the formation of the having that methodology, which then leads to the methods, meaning like the data gathering techniques, like interview, questionnaires, and once you have the data, this leads to the interpretation of data, which may sometimes need experts. Really depends on how complicated the study is, and then arriving at a certain conclusion. Sometimes they may add also recommendations, because that also depends on the type of study and the publication of results or the dissemination of results. Another important thing to consider when it comes to research studies is the knowledge translation, because in the first place, research is done in order to create new knowledge or maybe to find out something. Really depends on the goal of the researcher. And a research study, if it just ends as a piece of paper and the results are not really disseminated to their target audience, then it's going to be viewed as useless. So one important aspect to really consider in conducting research is the knowledge translation. Like, how can the knowledge or this new knowledge be translated, or how can it be, or the information that you get, how can it be disseminated to your target audience? Now, it's easier said than done on how you can actually do that. Like, you can think of publications, we can think of conferences, but in the real world scenario, there can be barriers to this. And sometimes, because when you try to, when you publish studies, of course, like in the form of a journal, we may be using technical terminologies, and sometimes depends on the target audience, they might not be able to understand what we are really trying to say. So there are a lot of challenges when it comes to knowledge translation, and there are many frameworks out there that can help researchers as to how they can actually translate the knowledge to their target audience. But the key thing is to really reflect as to what strategies and what techniques can the researcher actually employ in order to be effective with the knowledge transfer. Because I think we are now in this day and age wherein we have that information boom, and sometimes it's very, very difficult to really determine if the information that you're getting from, whether from online, for example, is really legit and reliable or not. Like, sometimes even myself can be confused in whatever information that I get online, and if are they really truthful or are they really reliable in the first place. So again, when it comes to research studies, one important aspect is really the knowledge transfer, and it's easier said than done, but in reality sometimes there could be challenges along the way, and it's really complicated and it's really difficult. But it's again one important aspect that I would like to emphasize in this video. So that's the summary in a nutshell about what research is, and research as a definition, and as research or introducing research. And we've tried to define what research is, meaning that it is a systematic way of investigating to answer a certain research question, which usually has step-by-step approach. Because it's systematic, so it has a step-by-step approach, which then ends up with coming up with a conclusion. And the most important part that I would like to insert into this video is that when it comes to research studies, what we need to also consider there is also the knowledge transfer, on how we can actually translate that knowledge or transfer or disseminate that information to the target audience, so that the research study in itself can be useful. So there you have it. That's the introduction to research, about making sense of research. And I hope you've learned a lot about this introductory video about what research is and how research is really viewed in the academic community and in the scientific community. And my next video, I will be talking about the different research paradigms, and I would like to make these videos short as possible. For now, I can see that in my recording is around 13 minutes or 14 minutes, but I hope it's short enough to really have a good understanding as to what research is in general and as a definition. And again, I want to thank you for watching this video.